Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you're coming in the webinar room, I want to welcome you. My name is Marche. I'm the webinar director here at Advice Chaser, and we're very excited to get started on this really important and I think interesting presentation. Before we introduce our panelists today, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation entitled Neurodiversity and Friendship. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and we'll try to address those queries or those comments during the webinar today. But if we're not able to get to them, go ahead and leave your contact information as well, and we're happy to reach out to you after today's event to make sure those get addressed. Again, we want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd love to introduce you to today's guests. Our first panelist is Caroline Turner, who is a social worker in Austin, Texas, where she has worked with individuals with autism and neurodiverse needs since 2011. She works full-time at Dell Children's while serving on the board of directors for Imagine Away and volunteering regularly with the Autism Society of Texas. Caroline has run social skills groups since 2011 and is peers certified. She is also the founder of Quirky Buds, which we will hear about later. When not working, she loves spending time with family, friends, and her dog, Otis. Our second panelist today is Eddie Wongwai, a student at Austin Community College and who is also on the spectrum. Throughout his life, Eddie has had personal experience with making and maintaining friendships. And over the past year, Eddie has completed training through the Program for Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills, also called the PEERS program. Eddie works part-time in addition to going to school, and in his free time, he enjoys reading, swimming, parks, and geography. And I'll go ahead and turn over the time to you, Caroline.
Cool. Thank you, Marche. I'm so excited to be here and talk with you all. As Marche mentioned, I am a licensed social worker in Austin, Texas, and I work primarily at the Children's Hospital, but really this work is going to be kind of, or this conversation is going to be kind of focused on my other passion, which is around a new website I founded called Quirky Buds. And really talk with you all about the importance of friendship and for all people, and talk specifically about people who are neurodiverse on the spectrum, ADHD, or however you identify as neurodiverse. And I'm going to pass to Eddie so he can share a little bit more about himself too.
Hi, I am 26 years old. I'm an individual on the spectrum. I have gained a lot of experience making new friends and how to fit in like the neurotypical world or neurodiverse world. So yeah, oftentimes it's harder for like us to fit in with the world, and there are strategies we can use to help bridge the gap and make connections with others.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about those today. So we want to start too by just kind of talking about friendship. And Eddie and I have known each other, I don't even know how long now, a while.
Since 2017.
Since 2017, yes. And we've talked a lot about friendship in general, and also with people who are neurodiverse, as we mentioned. But first and foremost, we've always talked about how friendship is really a choice. it's a choice for all people, right? We get to choose who we want to be friends with, and people get to choose if they want to be friends with us. And sometimes I think, especially post the pandemic, or, when you have trouble making friends, we forget that because it's something that we're just so hungry sometimes to make friendships. But we really got to remember that friendship is a choice, and we want to choose people who have a lot of similarities. And also we're going to talk a little bit more about what we're looking for when we want to find good friends. But one of the main things I just want to mention is that, we are all hardwired to be connected. Humans have this like innate wanting to be, connected to a community, connected to friendship, and really have people that they can rely on. So it's something that's true for everyone. Sometimes when we talk about neurodiverse individuals, specifically people on the spectrum, there's this misconception that, oh, they must not want friends. And I'm sure Eddie can speak to how that's really not true at all. And that we all want friends, we all want to be connected. And there's this really strong kind of repeated research that tells us there's a really positive correlation between friendship and mental, but also physical health. So when we have close friends, we're more likely to be happier, we're more likely to go out and be physical, and that really improves our health and overall well-being. Obviously, friends help us cope with stress and other difficult times, but overall, we just know this really increases this sense of self-worth and happiness. So I don't know, Eddie, what do you feel like? I mentioned that kind of misconception, but I don't know how you feel about what.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. I mean, I can be shy sometimes, like not want to talk. It doesn't mean I don't want to be with people. Just maybe I don't feel like being with people in the moment. I do and can make friends. Just take me a little time to do so.
Love that.
And the right environment.
Yes. Let's go to, perfect. Okay. So now we talk about factors in friendship. So as I mentioned, we want to think about how friendship is a choice, and we want to choose friends that we know are going to be kind of set up for success for all people. So one of the big things is common interests. And I'm going to have Eddie at the end talk a little bit about his maybe specific interests and how that can sometimes be difficult to find, but we want a common interest. That's a lot of ways that we as, individuals kind of go out and do things. It's usually based on some sort of interest or something that we enjoy to do with other people. So if I really like, reading and I try to become friends with somebody who really likes sports, it can be difficult to, find something that we can do together. So we want to find somebody who has a common interest to us, and we can kind of base our activities or outings around that. Mutual motivation. So we talk about this a lot, especially with young kids, and thinking about how sometimes we can see bullying or manipulation sometimes of individuals who may not be as socially apt as others. We really want to notice if there's any sort of power differential. So that includes things like age. If you're being friends with somebody who's a lot older than you, that can kind of be a pretty significant power differential, especially as a young child. So we want to notice that. We want to make sure that, the status, which is kind of this, hopefully is changing, but the idea that there's like these different popular groups and wanting to make sure that people are not kind of, being taken advantage of. So the status is really equal. And then anytime that we're doing something, is that mutual kind of sharing. Goes into the next one about sharing the conversation, sharing activities. So we're not friends with somebody who's just always telling us you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And, I'm in charge all the time. That's not fun for anybody. But that's also not really something that is true of a true friendship. So we also want to obviously be authentic and be able to be our true selves, which I think is something that, when we talk about neurodiversity, I think in the next coming slides is really difficult sometimes, because it feels like if you're not able to explore your own specific interests, it can be hard to feel like your own true self in those interactions. And it's something that's really important for when you're developing a close friend. And then this last one, frequent interaction, which I think, again, as I mentioned before with the pandemic, it can be really difficult to kind of have that sometimes, but it's really important because it kind of increases our ability to make friendships and be authentic, but we want to make sure that we're kind of having those regular interactions, not only online, but in person when available. Eddie, I know we've talked, you and I, about like your own common interests and trying to find those within people. How has that been for you? What do you feel like is like the most difficult?
Sometimes it can be pretty easy. Like, I like music, and I know a lot of people that do like music. It's something I can easily connect to and talk to other people about. I know what's a bit harder, and I know that every single autistic person or person in general is different with the interests they have. Like me, I'm interested in geography, interested in looking at maps, learning about places in different countries. I understand. Throughout my life, I've had a difficult time connecting with others to that friendships through that, and that's okay because I could still get along with someone who doesn't like the same thing I do, but it helps that if they are nice to you and can talk to open up to them as people, then that helps as well. Obviously, you do want some common interest in, like some common value, and that'll help things a lot better, make you a lot more comfortable. But it's okay for them not to be 100% the same.
Mm-hmm. And with the geography piece, Eddie, I know you were talking to me last week about, maybe if they don't specifically share your interest in geography, you can mention about like the parks in their area.
Yeah, I can sort of do that. And that's more like a human connection than just saying, what's your zip code? Because not everybody studies it, or they just think it's freaky. And that's happened to me too. So
Yeah, so I liked that so basically what we were saying is, I shared my zip code with Eddie, and then he was able to kind of relate to me about a park in my area, and ask me if I had been there and, talk about that rather than just specifically my zip code, which was kind of nice to branch into something, that I don't know a lot about zip codes, but I do know about parks. So that was a nice way to kind of connect, even though we weren't maybe talking about the same exact thing. Okay, so when we talk about specifically neurodiversity and friendship, and as Marche mentioned, myself, I've been trained in the peers curriculum, which is out of UCLA. It's a great curriculum talking about how to really build social skills. And so that's something that I just want to mention as a resource for people, but also, one of the places that I have really learned a lot about neurodiversity and friendship. So I want to reference that as a resource, but also as a reference for me. But one of the things, especially that we talk about with neurodiverse individuals and friendships is that, people on the spectrum sometimes want friends who are like them, as Eddie mentioned. So sometimes friends on the spectrum, but also if not, neurotypical people as well. That can be great, but also people who are on their same level and have these similar interests again. And there's a great research article I can put in the chat that kind of talks about this specifically for teens on the spectrum. But one of the things too, as we talk about that, it's good for families to find support for their child with autism, outside of school, but also kind of who are in close proximity. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the first slide, where we can make sure that you can have those regular interactions and more authentic, so that we're not just like, oh, you get to see them one time and then that's it. It can be really difficult to find friends who share similar interests, as Eddie just mentioned about the zip code piece specifically. But as we talked about, it doesn't have to be this, very hyper-focused, exact kind of special interest. And that's something that we can talk about, I think, coming up, about how we can maybe merge those interests into some more similarities, if that's something that y'all want. And I think, we talk a lot about this in peers, and it's one of the things that I always say about social skills that is so interesting is when you teach social skills, we're really like doing the opposite of social skills. We're kind of being, direct and maybe a little more blunt than we would be in social settings. When it comes to social settings, we tend to be really You know, oh, if someone were to ask me to hang out and I didn't want to, I'd say like, oh, I'm kind of busy, right? We're not usually trained to be like, oh, I actually am not interested, or I'm busy, or I'm, you know, never wanting to hang out. It's usually just I'm busy. And that can be really confusing for anybody, but especially for young kids who maybe struggle with social skills. Like I said, it's kind of hard to pick up on those cues. And really, it's just really important for all people, but especially when it comes to individuals who are neurodiverse, to find these friendships who can be honest and be a true friend. We want to make sure that we're not just like, you know, partnering up with somebody who's going to be nice to us, no matter kind of what the situation is. What do you think about that, Eddie? Have you ever had somebody just be quote unquote nice to you without really being a true friend?
Yes, at first, I thought they were nice to me, but then did a lot of instances where they were yelling at me for no reason. So also that can not saying it's going to happen, but it can happen in the real world. And I do know, especially in regards to dating, that people can say, I'm busy, instead of say, I'm not interested. And I can understand that could be hard for autistic people.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to dating, that's a good example because it is something that we just think about with dating. But also when it comes to friendship, like we said before, you know, friendship is a choice, just like dating is a choice. So one of the main challenges, right, when we talk about making and keeping friends for all people, but also specifically for people who are neurodiverse, is, you know, this not following through. So sometimes we hear about, you know, meetup groups or, you know, even like some Facebook groups I'm in where we'll see people post, you know, some sort of question and not get any feedback. That's just online, but then that can also happen in person where folks just don't follow through in terms of wanting to hang out or do something. And that can be really hard, especially when you're trying to make friends. And if you have these experiences repeatedly, you're not really reinforced to want to continue to try. So it's something just to know that that happens a lot in peers. When we talk about joining a group conversation, we know that half of the time that individuals try to join a group conversation, over half of the times they get denied. So that means that we have to continue to try, even when we're getting denied repeatedly, which can feel really difficult and hard, but we have to keep trying because it's a way that we make friends. So this not following through is kind of a big one in terms of, you know, not only when you're trying to make plans with somebody, but also just feeling maybe rejected in some ways from the other end. Not understanding subtle cues. So kind of we talked about on the slide before this is just having somebody say, I'm busy, instead of saying, I'm really not interested. We also sometimes see with individuals specifically on the spectrum is kind of oversharing right away. And that can be hard when we're trying to make new friends or keep friends. You know, there's kind of this dance of getting to know each other where we're trying to be a little bit more, you know, just everything's fine, everything's good, without kind of jumping into really oversharing what's going on. And I think that can be really difficult, especially when you want to share information with a friend and kind of get that out. The same is true for the other way, where sometimes we see people say, you know, tell me more about, you know, maybe like your parents who are divorced. And that can be a topic that some people don't want to talk about. And so just also knowing those subtle cues again of when to maybe pivot the conversation. Not letting the other person talk as much or pick the activity, that goes back to that kind of sharing a mutual power differential, especially when it comes to friendships. So we want to make sure that we're having people who are going to be able to share that back and forth in really 50% of the time of a conversation and an activity, and then staying on topic. So really, if we're talking about, you know, geography, or if we're talking about music, as Eddie mentioned before, we want to make sure that when we're talking with people, we try to stay on topic. Otherwise, it can be a real challenge when trying to make friends. Eddie, did you want to add anything about your any challenges you've noticed?
Yes,
Not only for online, yeah.
so yes, sometimes when I'm in a group, I'm in a video chat with my friends, it does happen where we got into different topics, and that sometimes I can forgive if they don't do it too much, because like they might have prop because they just want to talk about what they want to talk about, and that's okay. But there is a time when it gets like more socially awkward enough. Hasn't happened to me all that often, but yeah, sometimes it can be hard to like keep the top conversation going, especially if it's something like you're not interested about the group's talking about.
Totally. Yeah. And that's true for like, I think a lot of people, it can be difficult to stay on topic if you're not interested in what they're saying. So it takes a lot of practice, right? To kind of role play that and make sure that we're staying on topic.
Caroline, we do have a little bit of an audio delay on just a little bit of your audio there. So why don't you go ahead and cut your video so that we don't have that so much. And I did have a comment here, and this is for either of you, but especially Eddie. I'm assuming that some of these tips that you're talking about are at the beginning of making friends. And the comment here is that a good friend would understand that you don't necessarily pick up on neurotypical cues. Is that correct? And would just tell you directly.
I mean, that's a little hard. I mean, well, yes. To answer the question, yes, they are. These are foundations for like making friends, but also in your friendships, in your social relationships, that as well. And for the part of understanding social cues, like when you're in an environment with neurotypicals and they don't know much about autism, that could be a little harder. But my group of friends, like sort of understand me. I think it's up to the individual whether that happens or not.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. Go ahead, Caroline.
Yeah, so talking about really how to address challenges, those challenges we just talked about. And I think, all of these and those challenges are right, sometimes easier said than done. So I want to just acknowledge that as it's not obviously a quick fix, but really, we want to talk about empathy a lot and kind of understand how other people are feeling in the conversation, or what it feels like if, the whole time maybe I'm talking about, like I mentioned before, books, and Eddie really wants to talk about music. That doesn't feel very good. So trying to understand, exactly what that might be like. Sharing the conversation and the activity. Like I said, this just kind of takes practice and a reminder, from, people in your life, whether that be a social coach, a mentor, a caregiver, if, depending on the age, it can be really helpful to just kind of practice that. And role playing, I think, is definitely something that I know we've done a lot in the past, and it's feels silly, but it can be really helpful, and it can be fun to role play, the opposite of what you're trying to teach. So for example, like if we want to role play sharing the conversation, I might, have a conversation with Eddie where I talk nonstop about books, and then he can see what that feels like, and also, understand that that's not fun. So really, trying to be able to role play both sides of like the opposite of how maybe it can feel really difficult to have somebody just on and on and on about books, and then practicing kind of the other side of, yes, we're gonna share the conversation. And again, Peers also has great videos of these on their website. If you all want to check any of them out, it can be fun to just kind of watch and see what they mention. And then there's lots of different instances and kind of role playing, kind of pointing out to happen on TV. So if your child likes a certain character or a certain show, it can be fun to kind of find those instances in this television show to share with them and kind of point out what you're noticing that might be good or bad. And then, waiting for a pause in the conversation, that basically just means, having a moment to really not just jump right in, but really kind of sitting back and thinking about what we're going to say in response. And then our lovely follow-up questions, which I know Eddie has heard me probably talk about nonstop, but really practicing these who, what, where, when, why. So whenever anybody does share something, you can kind of come back with a quick follow-up question in terms of, even like, this weekend I hung out with my sister. These kind of quick questions of what did y'all do? When were you together? Why can be just a really quick kind of follow-up question to spur the conversation going and help practice some of those social skills. Eddie, what do you think about I wanted to ask you specifically about the television piece. Are there any shows that you've noticed that have been helpful, when we talk about friendship or specifically with people on the spectrum?
I guess Love on the Spectrum has been the most a helpful one in that regard, because they're trying to find, they work with a social, some of the people, I shouldn't say characters because it's reality. Some of the people, they have a social coach that comes to the dating coach that comes with them and talks about making the conversation 50-50. Basically they sort of like succeed, like kind of like, if not succeed, get better, improve at maintaining social relationships with others. So that is a very good, for me, it's helped a lot with understanding that notion better.
Love that. I like that show a lot too. Okay, so talking about special interests and really trying to think outside the box. So we kind of gave the example before about the zip codes and geography and maybe turning that into a more generalized interest or common interest. And this is just more, an easy one when we talk about sports. So, again, there's lots of different kind of specific interests for all people. And when it comes to people on the spectrum, I feel like it is really, as a person who works with a lot of different individuals, I love to hear about those specific interests, but sometimes that can be hard to generalize when we're trying to make new friends in our community. And so, for example, one of the things here that you can just think about is if your child's really into sports, which I know is kind of an easy one. So I want to give that caveat, but when we think about sports, we can think about, okay, if my child really, really loves soccer, as the picture shows, we can have them kind of talk about soccer, maybe in a online chat group. They can go to an Austin FC game. They could go to, a club, or maybe get a group together to go watch a game on a TV somewhere. Or play the game. So I think oftentimes when we get fixated on specific interests, it's hard to think outside the box and come up with different activities we can do. And it's really awesome because there are a lot of different ways that we can incorporate special interests outside of just, as Eddie mentioned, talking about geography. We can also talk about what's in that area, talk about parks, maybe go to that park. But just really trying to expand the special interests to generalize more common interests to make better friends. And so again, another example is if your child really, really likes trains, and sometimes that's kind of a stereotype, but sometimes we talk about, really focused on the train schedule. Can we then incorporate, airplanes or buses, or just expand it a little bit to include more people and try to open up that range of friends that could be included in their group? Eddie, is there anything you wanted to add for your own experience?
Yeah, sometimes I have gone to social events that aren't in my interests. For instance, I've gone to a basketball game because it was part of a social event. So it's worth branching out here and just every once in a while. It's not that you have to do it every single day, but it's okay to do that for a little bit. And maybe you can take the turn with them other friends and it's just an activity you like. Like for me, going to a park. That's something that everyone would enjoy. So, and I'll get to look at the neighborhood, and they'll get to explore a nice green space. Something like that could really help.
And Caroline, as we're talking here, I know that you specifically work with parents and their kids, but a lot of these tips, I'm assuming, will work for anyone of any age. I'm just thinking about my own personal experience as a neurotypical individual. I did not grow up listening to a lot of music, but good friend of mine, like, let's find out what kind of music you like. And so we've been listening to all sorts of music because I'm not real, it wasn't really an interest of mine. So that just sparked an idea of my in my own experience.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. I sometimes often talk about parents. And yes, I do an adult group as well, but that's kind of my 40 hours a week brain talking. So yes, it can be applicable to any age. And I think, I love that Eddie mentioned the basketball game too, because even when you're at the game, it's not like you're constantly talking about basketball. So you can go kind of be with friends and then also maybe have a conversation in regards to, something else, if that's not your favorite thing to talk about. So this is a story that I think was published on Facebook, and I'll find it to send out if Marche wants that. But there is this wonderful story about how oftentimes as neurotypicals, we expect neurodiverse people to just come into our world. And we're constantly asking them to make concessions around social skills or kind of leaning into what our rules may look like. And I just love the idea of doing the opposite sometimes and trying to really mix up and get into the neurodiverse world. And that includes, even things like Temple Grandin talks about, and one of my favorite quotes, she talks about how boring life would be without neurodiverse people, because we would just be really social yickety yak people and not able to do anything creative. Those are her words, not mine. But I just love that idea, because I think it is, sometimes we forget that we should be, also leaning into the opposite, to just put ourselves out there and become more creative or thoughtful. So there's this great story about a parent who hosts her young child's birthday at a laundromat because he loves laundromats, or he loves washers and dryers so much. And so essentially what happens is she reaches out to the local laundromat and says, like, hey, can we come have my son's birthday party there? And, had to convince them that she wasn't crazy. This is what her child wanted. And basically invited all his neurotypical friends, his neurodiverse friends, and said, like, hey, we're going to just lean into what he wants for the day, because it's his birthday. And so everybody came and they got lots of quarters. And he just had the best time, being able to be around what he likes, his favorite thing of the washing machines, but then also having all his friends there, as opposed to this very typical birthday party with the singing of the birthday song and all this stuff that sometimes can be really overwhelming for kids. And so I just love this story because it was essentially just a wonderful way that the family was like, we're going to lean into what our child wants for his day. And Eddie, I saw you kind of nodding along. Did you like that story?
It's a really, really, really good one, especially to go to lengths to get what he wants, when it may seem, well, to me, I not to offend anybody, but I think it's weird that he was at a party at the laundromat. But it may be his interest then, and that's okay. Yeah,
for sure. And interests change, right? So sometimes, kids can have a big change in their interests, and having the opportunity to just lean into them, I think is really awesome. Like that story. I also often, share, years ago, I was working at the Autism Society, and one of our staff members, her child was super interested in porta potties at the time, which was a unique interest. But it was awesome because he got to help us pick out which porta potties we were going to use for our annual walk. And so he was kind of in charge of that as a teenager, which was just a fun experience to see. I didn't know that there was lots of different kinds of porta potties, but he did, and he picked the best ones at the best price. And it was just something that, he got to utilize what he was really interested in and help our whole team. So there's different things like that too, where you can kind of just lean into that and really maybe allow your child or adult to have that opportunity to put their special interests to good use. Eddie, I'm going to let you just talk a little bit about ways that you found friends first, if you don't mind. I know we
No, I don't mind at all.
Cool.
All right. So for me, as a young adult, I go, one example where I find like friends is at social meetup groups. For instance, the Autism Society of Austin, they have like social meetup groups where you come and meet people. Well, it used to be that pre-COVID, but now you meet online. But that's okay because you have social connection with other people who are autistic like or neurodiverse like yourself. And also I got involved in another group where I can do social creativity. For instance, I've done like art club and wellness club over the past few months, and I'm hoping to get more into that organization. So yeah, and also they gave me an in-person activity to do during 2021 during COVID, so that helped a lot because not every organization is going to do the same thing. So yeah, and the thing we talked about in peers is trying to find find groups that cater to your interest. For instance, I've never joined a book club before, but if I were to join a book club, it'd be helpful for me to like talk to people who are into books. So yeah, it is good to join as much organizations and groups as possible so that you branch yourself out to more friends, because you meet people you wouldn't if you just stayed in your house all day and did nothing.
Yeah. And that's a great example too of just kind of putting yourself out there, maybe into groups you didn't think about before. And I've actually been thinking about myself, I need to join a new book club. So, but yeah, there's like lots of different ways to kind of search through, find new friends and kind of putting ourselves out there online or in person, especially now that COVID is a little more tame. But the idea of, kind of searching out affinity groups or organizations near you, a church near you. Obviously, as Eddie mentioned, there's great meetup groups and online groups happening. And that's something that, we always share about and at some point could help potentially, if needed, find those near you. School is a big one. I know, as mentioned before, at the ACC, as Eddie goes there, there's lots of different groups kind of through the different colleges, through, high school, elementary, things like that. And then these really special interest groups. So if there is anything specifically, for example, in Austin, I know there's like the Austin Young Chambers, which is kind of just a young professional group that people can get involved in, or volleyball, or, whatever it may be. And really, it just takes some time to dig around and find those. But I think it's, once you start looking for them, it just always surprises me how much is actually going on. So I think that's also just good to know and to practice continually putting ourselves out there.
I did want you to mention a little bit about Quirky Buds, Caroline, and this might be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. So another way that you can meet friends for yourself or for your child is this new website I started called Quirky Buds. It is totally free and a resource, and it's a private matching system. So essentially, you can sign up for yourself or for your child, and I'll match you with people in your area. So everybody's within 30 minutes in your area with a similar interest and close in age. So that's really just a way to try to kind of bridge the gap with making friends. We have lots of neurodiverse individuals, but also neurotypicals who have just kind of shared, it's hard to make friends post-pandemic, and a way to try to help make connections for people that really is based in this root of friendship around around the common interests, around close proximity, and around this mutual motivation. So at least close in age. And that's always something I'm happy to share more about if people have questions. But right now we have folks signed up ages 2 all the way through 70. So anybody's really welcome. We're in 12 states and growing. So, depending on where you are, it might take a little longer to get a bud, but we're hoping to continue growing and kind of help people find other friends near them.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for a couple of question and answer, and then we're going to let people have their day back. But I'm going to go ahead and address those just a second here. Let me pull those up. All right, here's the first question, and this may go to either of you. What about maintaining a friendship? What's the best way you've found to maintain your relationships with your friends?
I think communication is the key. Like keep communicating, like keep texting. I'm friends with 2 other people from out of state. They live in different states. We all live in different states. And so we are in group text, and there's like one day, like it is during COVID, we started talking like every single day through Google Meet or Zoom or whatnot. That really helps to like keep your relationship going. You can do that too. Also, I think a good schedule activities on a regular basis if you can. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I agree with those things. I think you're spot on when it comes to the communication. As we talked about, one of the main challenges is the no follow through. So if we're not communicating about, maybe why we can't do something or whatnot, that can feel really hard. And then also, I think honesty and authentic communication. So, or authentic friendship. So if we're not being honest too about, what we need in a friendship, or about maybe why we're not showing up, that can be really difficult. But I think really trying to address some of those barriers of meeting regularly and being able to be authentic is the best way to kind of maintain those friendships.
Okay, here's another question. I like what you're saying about authenticity. What about if it feels fake when you're trying to make friends? I don't want to be fake.
That is a great question. And I just had this conversation with a parent yesterday that is reminding me a little bit of that, where she said, I've been kind of she was trying to force her 12-year-old to be friends with somebody in their neighborhood. And finally, her daughter was like, I just don't like that person. And so, I don't want to do that. And so I think it goes back to the idea that, friendship really is a choice. And that sounds, I don't know, kind of cliche, but it's something to remember, because you do get to choose your friends, and, friends get to choose you. So if it feels really fake and you're just not excited about it, I would say, try not to put a lot of time and energy into that, and try to find, maybe go back to some of those groups, or branching out into other places where you can really find somebody that you feel like you can be your true self with, and connect with.
Eddie, you have any thoughts on this about avoiding being fake?
I mean, if you don't, obviously you don't want to hurt their feelings and say like, no, I don't want to be friends with you, but you can like, as Caroline said, you can get more activities, get into more activities that you enjoy doing. Like you can be civil with them and have conversations, but you don't have to be with it. So you don't have to be with them all the time. Like branch out for other friends, as Caroline said. So yeah, I've had instances where that's happened before, and I just hang out. I don't want to get into details about that situation, but yeah, just be nice to the person. Don't like make them your enemy, but it is okay 100% for you not to be 100% completely friends with the other person.
All right, can you talk a little bit about when you have negative experiences in a friendship, and how how that might affect future friendships.
Eddie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
This isn't like friendship that I had is not bad. It's just that sometimes that one time I had this friend who would come over to my room, like a lot, like knock on the door, and he'd like follow me around. Sometimes I wanted, so not, and sometimes I didn't even want to. I wanted time to myself, and so I told him, "Hey, there are going to be times when I want time to myself," and my other friend honored that. But now I'm like more careful on who I give my number to, and not to give it too much. People I don't really like know fully. Like I gotta trust them before I give them my number, because that kind of stuff could happen.
Very interesting. So what I'm hearing is that you're having some boundaries about your own personal information.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point and something that we definitely have talked about previous, but yeah, that, and also I think it can be really hard because, as I was mentioning, when we talk about like joining the group, how difficult it can be to get rejected, and to feel like you keep wanting to put yourself out there. And so really, I want to normalize that and say that happens to everybody. That's like such a very common experience. And also just validate that it doesn't feel good. So I think, trying to, maybe when you have a negative experience, as Eddie mentioned, boundaries with your personal information, but also boundaries with, maybe getting your hopes up in some ways that it could be a close friend. So really just trying to think about, as we make friends and try to build that connection, maybe just noticing potential, subtle signs if it's not going to go the way that you wanted it to try to help with some of that negative feelings, and boundaries around like your own emotions, if that makes sense. I think that's easier said than done, but go ahead, Eddie.
I was taught this in my classes. Previously, when I did independent living training in New Mexico, I was told that one of the teachers said, if a friend doesn't want to be with you, it's their loss. It's not going to be your own loss.
That's great.
Absolutely.
I like that. I'm going to use that. Caroline, this is a question for you as a social worker. I don't know if you know the research, but if you can talk about how many friends, or many close friends, I guess would be a good way to clarify that. How many close friends is typical for people to have?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that. I can find out. I think just there is something that's like, we can't really be close with, I think, more than like 6 people. Might be a little bit bigger than that, as I'm racking my brain. Y'all can't see me, but I'm like really massaging my brain right now. But I do think, it's also dependent on each individual in some regards. So it depends on your time and also the energy that you put into those friends. Sometimes people are close friends with just 1 or 2 people and spend all their time with them, which can give the same benefits if, you're hanging out with 7 different people each day of the week. But I apologize, I don't know the exact research on that.
Okay, that's all right. We can get back to you on that person who asked that question. We can research that and get back to you. I think that's all the time that we have for questions. I want to thank our panelists for being here. Thank both Caroline and Eddie so much for explaining and giving such a good information to our audience today. On behalf of Advice Chaser, we want to thank our attendees for attending. Look for an email soon for a link to the replay of this event. You're welcome to share that with friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.